Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast, Clearing the Fog in Menopause with Sibelius Sage. I'm Jennifer Grebo, Editor-in-Chief for Nutritional Outlook, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We're pleased to bring you this webcast presented by Nutritional Outlook and sponsored by Sibelius Natural Products. I would like to share a statement from our sponsor. Sibelius takes traditionally used ingredients and provides the scientific evidence and clinical validation to support a number of consumer need states. They believe that natural ingredients can make a great contribution towards healthy aging. This is why they are constantly investing in building modern scientific evidence behind well-known botanicals, helping their partners as well as consumers make informed decisions. Using its proprietary chronoscreen platform, Sibelius takes a science-led approach to uncover the potential and provide insights into the impact of natural ingredients on age-related conditions. We have a few important announcements before we begin. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and we encourage you to ask questions during the event. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of the video player. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small square icon in the bottom right-hand corner of the media window. The slides will advance automatically during the event, and if you have any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the question mark Help widget in the top of your presentation window. I'd now like to introduce today's speakers. We're pleased to be joined today by Dr. Kieran Edwards and Michelle Sepp. Kieran Edwards is the Chief Scientific Officer for Sibelius Natural Products. Since completing his PhD in plant genetics, Kieran has gained over 10 years' experience of biological research in academic and industrial settings. Over this time, he has used genetics, genomics, transcriptomics, and other systems approaches to investigate the regulation of physiological and biochemical traits in biological systems. In addition to his scientific training, Dr. Edwards also completed his MBA at the University of Cambridge. Michelle Sepp is the Business Development Director of North America for Sibelius Natural Products. She leads companies to grow by generating and developing business opportunities and building strong, dedicated client relationships and partnerships. A business strategist with experience across the nutraceutical, pharmaceutical, and CPG industries, Michelle completed her Bachelor of Commerce degree at the University of Alberta. Kieran, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. Please get us started.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer, for the introductions. So we're in back to school mode these days, and I'm going to ask you to think back to when you were in school and think about some of the subjects you studied, like science and math and history and art. Well, today's lesson is that we're going to take a look at these subjects and relate them to menopause. So we'll take a look at some numbers, we'll look at some supporting science, and we'll talk about the art of formulating, all to give you a cognitive solution for menopause. So let's get started. Some people would say that science is a boring subject, but that's definitely not the case today. Sibelius Natural Products believes that science holds answers to choosing natural ingredients that meet consumer demands. So you must be asking, how can that be? How can science apply to this? Well, in 2015, we developed a screening platform for selecting natural ingredients that had a positive impact on healthy aging. And so began the story of Sibelius Natural Products as an R&D spin-off company of Oxford University in the United Kingdom. The platform we developed is called chronoscreen, and it uses the C. elegans model organism to help us select the best ingredients from the best source. And we do this with attention and focus to traceability and quality control. So let's put science on the side for a sec and talk about the numbers and some math, especially math that affects women in menopause. So first off, the majority of women say that they regularly feel tired or drowsy as a part of menopause. In terms of brain fog, 60% of women say that they experience this, particularly around perimenopause. They feel disorganized and they feel confused. 50% of women suggest that the change has a negative impact on their home life. And we know that in 2020, the menopause market was estimated to be worth $14.7 billion. So what is it that consumers are looking for, or women are looking for help with when they are thinking of menopause? Basically, they're looking for help regarding two types of symptoms, physical and mental. On the physical side, they're looking for relief from the hot flashes they experience, as well as that fatigued and tired feeling. And on the mental side, they're looking for help with attention and focus and relief from brain fog and being able to not find their words. If we can deal with both of those types of symptoms, we get relief that will allow for improved mood and relaxation. And that's ultimately what we're after in a good supplement for menopause. So, time for today's history lesson. Did you know that our sage was used as early as the 13th century by monks in the United Kingdom to treat witchcraft? So why is this relevant? Well, witchcraft in the 13th century, or the symptoms of, are now what we know and associate with the same symptoms of dementia. And we know that dementia has a serious impact on daily life, affecting how we think, how we remember, and how we reason. So let me introduce Sibelius sage. The Latin name is Salvia officinalis, and it's a perennial plant that's grown and harvested exclusively for us at a UK farm. Something that's particularly noteworthy about Sibelius sage is that it has a very quick onset of action, and you can feel it working within 1 hour. This fast-acting situation means that consumers love it. They tell us things like, it energizes my mind, it keeps me sharp, and it gives me a buzz, but without the caffeine side effects. And one last thing, there's some positive feedback from our largest customer. Their number one nootropic product contains Sibelius sage. So how does sage work, and what does the science have to say? I'll pass it along to Kieran to address these questions.
That's great. Thank you, Michelle. So obviously we've looked at a bit of background for Sibelius, a bit of background around menopause, and also around sage. So now, as Michelle just mentioned, we'll take a look into why we're excited about Sibelius sage, and particularly its potential in the area of menopause, and how it may help with the symptoms that we've just touched on. As has been alluded to, our primary interest in sage and developing Sibelius sage has been around cognitive health and cognitive function. And that's what we've put most of our efforts into. But there's the way that the sage is working has really opened up an interesting area in relation to menopause. And actually, there's a long history of use of Salvia officinalis in terms of traditional medicine for applications in the menopause. So it's very nice that we can see from the research we've been doing in our sage how the effects we're seeing can translate through to improving the symptoms that are associated with menopause, such as brain fog and hot flashes. So specifically with regards to Sibelius sage and cognitive function, what we're really seeing is very rapid onset benefits in terms of focus and attention and secondary memory. And this is largely brought about through the changes we believe that are occurring to the modulation of levels of neurotransmitters, so the chemicals in our brain that are actually transmitting messages between different neurons. And in particular, we know from research that sage has been linked to increasing levels of acetylcholine neurotransmitters, and more recently we've been showing effects on dopamine and serotonin neurotransmitters as well. So in effect, the sage is inhibiting enzymes that would normally be breaking down these neurotransmitters and helping to maintain higher levels of them. And if we think about the acetylcholine, that's very important for memory. Dopamine is very important for focus and attention. So you can see how that plays through to the cognitive benefits we're seeing with sage, as we'll touch on in a few slides' time. Clearly, this ability to maintain focus and attention and memory recall are very important if we think about one of the key complaints with menopause around brain fog. So clearly there's a direct potential benefits from the Sibelius sage in terms of alleviating those effects. What's very interesting as well, if we look at it, these other neurotransmitters, including serotonin, are very much linked through to thermoregulation. which can explain why sage may have real beneficial effects in terms of reducing the events such as hot flashes. And it's also worth mentioning that dopamine and serotonin are kind of often referred to as happy hormones. So in terms of the beneficial effects on mood we might be seeing by boosting levels of these neurotransmitters, it's clear how these can all play through to really alleviating these symptoms that are associated with the menopause. If we start looking first off at the data we've got supporting the cognitive benefits of the sage, actually one of the first studies we did in people with the Sibelius sage was a study in older adults. So we're looking at adults 65 years and above, and around about half of the participants in this study were women. So we're looking at a group of postmenopausal women in here showing effects in response to taking the sage. And specifically, these people were performing a series of tasks on computers, and they were scored on their ability to perform these tasks, and it was measuring different aspects of their cognitive performance. And they would do a baseline test just to establish where they were as standard, and then they would be given one dose of the sage extract of Sibelius sage, or they were given a placebo, and they repeated these tests at intervals after that. And you can see in the charts on the left-hand side of the slide here that there's intervals at 1 hour, 2.5 hours, 4 hours, and 6 hours after having taken the treatment. So if we look, the left panel there marked A is actually a score of how well the participants were performing in terms of their secondary memory performance. So it's really about their ability to embed and recall longer-term memories. The placebo here in the open circles on the chart, what you'll notice is compared to the baseline performance, we see a significant fall off by 1 hour, and that's maintained all the way through to 6 hours. So you get around about a 40, it's close to a reduction in score of 40, which roughly equates to a 40% reduction in their performance on these tasks immediately from the baseline. And this fall off is quite standard. It's been seen in multiple studies now, probably related to things like fatigue, etc., playing in, because they're having to repeatedly do these tasks. What you'll notice, though, if we look at the sage in our most on the optimal dose we found in this study, which was a 333 milligram dose across the top there in the black triangles, downward ones, you can see that actually we're not showing the same fall off, and actually we've got, compared to the placebo, around about 30% improvement in performance by 1 hour and maintained all the way through for 6 hours. So we've got an immediate effect coming through in terms of their ability to recall memories from a single dose of sage. I want to reiterate, this is a single dose of sage they're receiving to have these benefits. If we move on, the chart on the right laid out in exactly the same way. In this case, panel B, we're looking at accuracy of attention, which is very much around the ability to focus on a task at hand. And what you can see there between the two here, we're getting benefits to memory recall and our ability to focus and attention. And you can see how that really would play through to sort of reducing the effects of brain fog. And just to reiterate again, we're looking at in a population here which is including postmenopausal women in there. So it's a direct, you've got direct inclusion of people relevant to the target market for these benefits. So we're seeing immediate benefits in terms of cognitive performance in a relevant population. And as I mentioned before, actually, we think one of the important things, one of the important activities of SAGE is around the modulation of neurotransmitters to impart these benefits. If we take dopamine as an example, what we know is that actually there's like an optimal level of dopamine that you want to be present, the optimal level of this neurotransmitter you want to be present. And if we look at the chart on the left here, if we, going across on the x-axis, if we think about dopamine levels, as they increase, you can see at the start of the chart, our cognitive performance increases. But if they become too high, we get too high levels of dopamine, actually you start getting the negative effects back in. So there's an optimal zone in the middle there where you want to maintain dopamine to have optimal cognitive performance. It's kind of like a Goldilocks zone. Everything is just right there. And what we find is that actually, in terms of cognitive performance side, the SAGE is helping to higher levels of dopamine. And that's really important in terms of when we think about menopause. And one of the key things we know is that during the menopause, part of the drives behind this is reductions in levels of the hormone estrogen. And as estrogen falls, it's actually estrogen itself actually plays an important role in helping to maintain high levels of dopamine and dopamine signaling. So as our estrogen falls during menopause, we get a reduction in levels and signaling through dopamine. And actually what probably is happening is that we're going down beyond the left-hand side of the optimal zone, as we see in the chart here. So we've got suboptimal levels of dopamine through that loss of estrogen-induced dopamine maintenance. Now, what we think is going to be very interesting is because the sage is having the opposite effect, in a sense, by helping to push those levels back up, we can actually try and counteract this reduction in dopamine levels and push ourselves back into that optimal zone.
Kieran, can you tell me how you know Sibelius Sage is working when you take it? Like, what does it feel like?
Sure, that's an interesting question. Obviously we've got the data there from the clinical studies to show measurable improvements in cognitive performance. Okay, but in terms of a feeling in that sense, in relation to that sort of things, people talk of really about having a very good focus. It really gives them that ability to focus on something and complete a task and recall things much better than they would do normally, particularly if you think about daily activities where, I guess you might walk into a room and forget why you went in there. It's kind of less likely for that to happen. But they really sort of saying about, they feel really honed in on a task, able to focus and deliver more. In turn, that touches on the sort of the cognitive performance side of things. And I think that's probably the best way to describe it is that ability to really concentrate, be productive, get things done.
Great. Thanks, Kieran.
If we move on from the sort of the benefits in terms of cognition, clearly one of the other major complaints related to menopause is around hot flashes. And actually, again, here, it's very interesting that, as we touched on, estrogen levels obviously fall during the menopause, and estrogen is playing a very important role in helping maintain thermoregulation. And a big part of this is potentially through maintaining high levels of this other monoamine neurotransmitter, serotonin. So it's as estrogen level falls, our serotonin levels fall. And although there's still some debate around the actual underlying drivers of the hot flashes, it's clear through the fact that hormone replacement therapy, etc., increasing our estrogen levels helps to mitigate this. It's clear there's a hormonal role in this. And we know that estrogen, much as in the case of dopamine, is helping to maintain high levels of serotonin, levels and signaling of that. So it looks like actually what's happening here is during menopause, we reduce our levels of estrogen, which has an effect on reducing levels of serotonin. And the importance of that is that serotonin is very important in terms of thermoregulation, and in particular, really helping to maintain and manage what we'd call the thermoneutral zone. So that's essentially the range of ambient temperatures that our body can tolerate without feeling too cold or too warm, and then having to either sweat or shiver to maintain the right body temperature zone. And what happens is as our serotonin levels fall, essentially that range narrows. So which explains why we're getting these, the hot flashes, etc., coming through with the menopause. So you reduce estrogen levels, that in turn results in a reduction in serotonin and pushes us down to an area where we don't have optimal thermoregulation. And much as in the same way as we saw for the dopamine, the Sibelius sage is actually inhibiting enzymes involved in the breakdown of serotonin. So by taking Sibelius sage, we can push up the levels of serotonin, help maintain high levels, and keep us at the right end of this range where we're maintaining a correct thermoregulation and a broader thermoneutral zone, essentially. So that, going to explain why that's a really important factor and can help support our thermoregulation and reduce the incidence of things like night sweats. And there's been numerous studies done with sage in general showing benefits to particularly around night sweats. And in fact, there is several products on the market, including Sibelius sage, which have got nice response from consumers telling us this is really helping with these kind of effects.
Speaking of consumers, can you tell us a bit about what a consumer's experience would be like taking sage for menopause?
So, yeah, obviously we've touched on the the clinical data showing benefits to cognitive performance, that ability to focus and recall memories in a very relevant population. So I think, broadly, we know that there's going to be benefits there, but clearly, if you can reduce that brain fog in there, there's going to be clear improvements to the individuals who are suffering from that brain fog element. As I just touched on, we've got a couple of products on the market. There are several products on the market already, and the response from those consumers has been very positive, saying that their incidence of hot flashes, for instance, have been reduced. That feeds through to improved sleep, improved mood. We're also touching on dopamine and serotonin being important for mood, and the consumers are describing having beneficial effects in those areas as well. So we get some really nice feedback on that side. So, strong support for improving brain fog and our reduction in hot flashes. So I think it's all very good feedback we're getting from people taking Sibelius Sage in this area.
Great, thanks. So in terms of combining the science that Kieran was discussing with the art of formulating, some key points that we'd want to note include that the ingredient is standardized to at least 2.5% rosmarinic acid. The recommended daily dose can be anywhere from 167 milligrams to 333 milligrams. There's a nice herbal flavor that's associated with the ingredient, but it's also easily masked. And there's a solid shelf life of 3 years. So how can you incorporate Sibelius Sage into formulations? Well, you can do it in traditional supplement formats like capsules and tablets, or you can do it in more novel applications like oral sprays or jellies or gummies and gel sticks, maybe stick packs in a powder format, perhaps food and beverage applications like carbonated drinks. And then, of course, the number one food group for women, you can incorporate sage into chocolate.
Michelle, actually, is this a good point as well to introduce the fact that the sage extract itself is available in different formats, which might lend themselves better to the different delivery formats we're talking about here?
Indeed, indeed. We have two formats, the classic sage and the milled sage, where the difference is the size, the particle size. So the classic sage is granulated, and then to make milled sage, we further micronize it. So what you're seeing is a finer particle size, which lends itself to the applications like the chocolate, the food and beverage. The classic sage lends itself mostly to the standard capsule and tablet kind of format. In summary, we hope we've empowered you with finding a cognitive solution for menopause. Sibelius Sage is an ingredient that's backed by strong science. It has solid numbers and excellent consumer feedback, and it works fast. And it's an easy to use ingredient in formulations, and you can use it in several different applications. We invite you to check us out. Visit our website, maybe download the sell sheet or request the white paper. And we're more than happy to hear from you by email and provide you with support on formulating or on brainstorming ideas so that you can offer your customers an excellent cognitive solution for menopause. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Michelle and Kieran. Before we get started on the question and answer session, I just want to remind our audience how you can submit questions. So you can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found directly below the video player. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's look our first question. And Kieran, Michelle, you guys can take turns, or whoever wants to take a stab at this. How does sage powder work in a beverage application?
Sure, I'll have to jump in on that one, I guess. So the powder itself is it's a water dispersible powder, so it goes nicely into liquid. So we've tried various different people have tried different formulations, sachets, etc., to mix in, and it goes in very nicely. You can mask flavors very easily in there to get a really nice tasting beverage with it, which is good. I suppose also worth commenting that anecdotally, people talk almost about it, then feeling the effects faster potentially in a beverage application than a capsule potentially. So it very much lends itself to those sort of applications.
Great. Excellent. Another question that we have, are there any limitations applicable to using sage?
So I suppose, yeah, I'll grab this one again, and Michelle, jump in if you want to add anything at any point. In terms of limitations, I guess from anecdotal evidence, we see potential interactions with sort of coffee, caffeine, and the sage, in the sense that we believe that, well, people feel that the effects are somewhat diminished if they're having high levels of caffeine beforehand. And we think, it makes reasonable sense because some of the mechanisms of action that we've got with the sage, particularly around the cholinergic activities, are shared by caffeine. So it may be the case, as we saw in with the dopamine, pushing the activities beyond the optimal level. So you start, instead of seeing benefits, they become more negligible and actually go the other way when you get too much. So that would be one area. The other consideration, the youngest people we've tested the sage in so far is 12-year-olds, so wouldn't necessarily go any younger than 12 for that.
Okay, got it. And sort of along those lines, somebody is asking, are there any contraindications, I guess, with taking sage?
Yeah, so interesting question. In that sense, we've already touched on the fact, I guess, the populations that we've tested it in, only going down to 12-year-olds, and obviously not talking about a contraindication there. There's nothing really major at this point in that area. One thing I would say, if people are sort of on medicines like, for Alzheimer's treatments, etc., obviously we share some of the activities. That's a donepezil. We've got these anti-cholinergic, the acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, for instance. So potentially you could get some interactions going on in that space, but no major contraindications, no.
Okay, perfect. Another question from the audience: how do you define fast acting?
Okay, yeah. As we saw, I suppose, from the clinical data, as we said in the presentation, it is a very fast-acting ingredient. The studies have been acute studies of people taking a single dose, and you could see from the cognitive tests, etc., that were being done, we're seeing significant improvements within an hour of taking it. So we've got the data there showing it being within an hour. Actually, when you talk to people's experience, you probably there. I think typically people are talking about feeling effects within the first 20 minutes, half an hour. And I guess I touched on with the sort of the beverage application, depending on the application, some people feel that it happens, more rapidly in those beverages or jellies or something, as opposed to the capsule. The studies themselves were done in capsule format, and we were getting the activity within an hour, as you saw. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. Another question. I know that you mentioned some of this, but are there any conditions to be avoided? Specifically, someone's asking about hypertension, I guess, when taking sage.
Yeah, so some of the activities there, specifically hypertension, interesting one. So with that, I guess, given that we're sort of affecting cholinergic system, you could be thinking about effects on blood pressure through choline acting on the smooth muscles lining your vasculature. We have looked. There was no significant effects on blood pressure, etc., in the studies that we've done. We didn't get any other adverse events coming through, so we don't believe that there would be any effect with that. We haven't seen it. Now, we haven't studied it specifically in a hypertensive population to be able to simply qualify that statement. But the evidence we've seen around that is that there's not having a direct effect on blood pressure.
Okay, great. Switching lanes a little bit, we have a question about the regulatory pathway for sage. what in the U.S., what is the regulatory status right now? Is the ingredient an old dietary ingredient or a new dietary ingredient? Where does that stand?
So yeah, in terms of the status on that in the US, sage has obviously got a long history of consumption in there, and so sage is a grass ingredient, so we're not requiring an NDI for the sage there. So in terms of dietary supplements, as I said, it's got the grass status for that.
Okay, perfect. Just seeing if we have one more question. I know a lot of the questions have fallen into this area, but is Sibelius sage safe to use with medications like Lyrica? Are you familiar with that?
I'm afraid I'm not familiar with Lyrica to know exactly.
Okay, neither.
Apologies.
No problem. And somebody asked, what was your sample size for the testing you mentioned?
So the testing we've done in the clinical study in the older adults, that was 20 older adults included in that study. We've since done a study in younger adults, which was a similar kind of group, but a similar sort of size study. Actually, I think we were looking at different. It was 30 people in that study in the younger adult. In the young adult groups within that study.
Okay, perfect. Here's another one. Will Sibelius sage help with brain fog due to fibromyalgia?
Interesting. So I guess if we're thinking about fibromyalgia playing through, then it's potentially that's being caused by, I suppose, inflammation feeding through. We do have anti-inflammatory effects from the sage that we've been seeing. We've got some published papers around that, so potentially it could help with that. Again, don't have any specific data on there to say, but I could see, given the activities, that it could make sense for applications in that space.
Okay, perfect. And I think we are just about out of time. I want to thank you again, Michelle and Kieran. That was such great information that you gave. And also, if we didn't answer your question, or if you have more questions you'd like to answer, please reach out to the company, Sibelius, at any time. And I want to thank the audience again for attending and participating in today's event. And I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Sibelius, for making today's educational webcast possible. We'd like to ask everyone in the audience to participate in a brief survey. The survey will populate automatically after today's presentation is ended. You'll also receive an email alerting you when this webcast will be available for replay. We invite you to forward that announcement to your colleagues who may have missed today's live event, so they can also see the excellent information that was provided today. Thank you all for joining, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.